A 911 call came in from Miss Tabitha Smith, who reported that her 91-year-old neighbor, Mr. Edward Vaughn, had been assaulted.
They dispatched a deputy to the scene. The deputy made contact with Tabitha Smith, who was also in the presence of Edward Vaughn. Edward Vaughn had lacerations to his face, bruising, swelling. He had blood coming out of his ears. Mr. Vaughn at that time was very lucid and of a clear mind and was able to easily recall what happened. Mr. Vaughn told the primary responding deputy that he actually made contact with two men earlier and that these individuals were interested in buying a vehicle that Mr. Vaughn had for sale. He said these individuals took Mr. Vaughn and basically abducted him, held him against his will, and put a blanket or some type of a carpet over him and drove him out in the county where they physically assaulted him.
He said they did zip tie his hands together and assaulted him, punched him, hit him in the head 2 or 3 times, and ultimately they had brought him back home.
At this point, Mr. Vaughn, being 91 years old, needed intense medical attention.
Ultimately, he was loaded up in the ambulance to go to the hospital.
The first time I met Edward Vaughn was with Mission Machine, a nonprofit, and I was just a volunteer driver at that time. Mission Machine's mission is to help homeless with a temporary place to stay, and he was just needing a place until he could get into an apartment. The happiest memory I've got of Mr. Vaughn is when he got his apartment here. He was just very happy about where he was at, very proud of what he had.
Mr. Vaughn didn't have a whole lot of money. He didn't have much for himself, but he had a very charitable soul to him. He would have helped just about anybody, I believe.
Mr. Vaughn was a World War II vet. He had got a Bronze Star. He was very proud of the fact that he had served his country.
He served me. He fought for me, my freedom, for all of us.
Everything that he had done in his life through war, through the many years after, he had always been a survivor. He knew what he needed to do, and he knew how to survive.
Miss Smith said that she noticed when she left that morning at about 6:30 that Mr. Vaughn's car was gone. When Miss Smith came back about 8, the car was back and Mr. Vaughn was inside the car.
That's when she saw Mr. Edward Vaughn in the presence of Mr. Jake Miller.
I knew Jake because I had seen him around the apartment complex before. He had a friend that stayed in the apartment complex, but never seen him around Mr. Vaughn ever. He was so out of place. Jake seemed agitated. He was very aggressive, mad, almost. I guess you could say, it just felt wrong. I approached Mr. Vaughn. The left side of his face was so swollen. It was horrifying. I asked him what the heck happened to his face, and he whispers to me to call 911. That's when I took him inside his apartment. I had to lock the door behind us. I grabbed the phone and I dialed 911.
At some point prior to the arrival of law enforcement, Jake Miller left.
One of those neighbors said that she was actually awake between 4:30 and 6 a.m. and heard who she knew to be Tommy Trosper at Mr. Vaughn's residence. We were also able to verify through another neighbor that Tommy Trosper was at Mr. Vaughn's house on the morning of the 911 call.
Jake and Tommy were very well known to us, mainly in property crimes, some assaults. key thing here is that Tommy Trosper and Jake Miller were thick as thieves, so to speak. They were friends. They were always around each other. So the fact that Tommy and Jake were identified being together, it really streamlined the investigation because now law enforcement had suspects. Once it was identified that Tommy Trosper and Jake Miller were actually the suspects that we were looking for, it was extremely important to find them.
We initially notified surrounding law enforcement agencies. We issued a BOLO for Tommy Trosper and Jake Miller. We exhausted no resources in that attempt to locate them. They did tell us that Mr. Vaughn's health was deteriorating and that if we wanted to speak to him, that we needed to speak with him fairly quickly.
The purpose of speaking with Edward Vaughn was to obtain what law enforcement calls a dying declaration. To obtain an official identification of the suspect was extremely crucial in this investigation.
Based on Mr. Vaughn's injuries, it was very difficult for him to speak. So we actually sent Detective Manus photos of Tommy Trosper and Jake Miller to confirm the identity of the suspects.
I remember walking into the ICU unit, and when I looked at Edward Vaughn, I was absolutely speechless. I've been doing this job for 30 years. I have seen evil in just about every way you can imagine. I've seen crimes that would keep you awake at night. When I seen what this man looked like and the extent of his injuries, it absolutely stunned me to the point where I had to gather my composure. And I recall that his eyes looked at me. He had the most sincere eyes. He had the most comforting. I told him what I was there for. I said, I want you to be able to identify these people. I said, do you know them? I said, if you know who these people are, can you blink your eyes for me? And he blinked his eyes. I said, Mr. Vaughn, I said, are these the people that hurt you? And he just blinked his eyes. I said, if you're 100%, I want you to blink twice for me. And I no sooner said that than he blinked twice. And that was a solid identification. I remember his eyes. I'll never forget them.
The police department pursued the vehicle. After a short pursuit, they're actually able to take the driver into custody. Tommy Trosper was then arrested for being in possession of a stolen vehicle and was then taken to the White County Sheriff's Department where he was processed and booked on those charges.
Our detectives went and pulled him from there before he was even dressed out on his charges. It was going to be tough to get a true confession out of Tommy. He was no stranger to this type of criminal procedure, but we had to try to get him to talk.
You want some coffee to kind of relax you a little bit?
I actually seen the face of Edward Vaughn, and I was looking at the person who made Edward Vaughn look like he looked, who beat that man to that condition. The suspect's confession is exactly what I wanted.
A 91-year-old man is fighting for his life after police say he was kidnapped from his Judsonia home Monday morning.
We were all very much shocked. We never thought that something like that could happen in our neighborhood, much less to a man as kind as Mr. Vaughn.
We knew from past encounters that Tommy Trosper had with law enforcement that we needed to cut straight to the chase. Building a rapport with Tommy Trosper, it was useless.
Okay. Tell me about Edward Vaughn.
I don't know what.
You was there, Tommy. We got witnesses. We got
I
statements.
understand.
Don't jack me
understand.
around. Just tell me what happened, bro.
What this is about a week and a half or so
Okay.
ago. And I was gonna buy that truck that he's got for real, like, and I asked him about it, and I looked at the truck. You know, he said he bought it for, I think he said $600 or something. And the old man said, "Well, I give it to you for what I paid for it." I said, "Well, I can't do that, you know." I said, "Well, look, man, look, this is all I got," and it was like 200 and some loose bills.
Okay.
And then a week ago, we took him. We went and ate Chinese food. Well, on the way back, he reached out and said, "I better than anybody's ever anymore." And I was like, "Whoa, what?" You know, and I kind of freaked out.
Talk about Ed Vaughn.
Yeah, and I kind of freaked out, and I was like, "Whoa, man, don't ever talk to me like that again." And then after that, it seemed like every day he would, "Come on, man, just let me see it, show it to me," and nobody believed me. So I stood there one day and just held my phone and recorded while he was talking to me, and I played the video back, and I said, "Man," I was like, "I could show this to somebody, and you probably get in trouble for it. I don't know."
In the state of Arkansas, one adult propositioning another adult for sex is not illegal whatsoever. Knowing Tommy Trosper, that immediately brought my interest because he's starting to pad his involvement. He's starting to make it a little bit easier for the world to understand why he did what he did.
I'm just gonna bribe Bill, man, like, "Hey, like, if you let me give you what I got, I won't turn this into the police."
So you were going to bribe him?
I mean, kind of, but
For what reason?
because I was gonna pay $600 for
The vehicle?
truck, you
See if
know,
it can go down to a lower price
Yeah.
or something?
I don't think that video bothered Tommy in any way at all other than the fact it gave him the motive that he need to later blackmail Edward Vaughn.
Okay. Hey, you told me things got out of hand yesterday. So what happened yesterday?
Me and Jay, we picked him up.
Picked him up at his house, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Where did you take him?
To Chris's house.
Chris who's? Chris Torres?
Yeah.
So you and Jake went to Chris's house at Red River Shores.
Yeah.
I knew that Chris Torres and Tommy Trosper were probably acquaintances, to say the least.
Chris Torres did have a building next to his house out there that they did work on cars. Maybe Tommy thought he could take that car out there and Chris could look at it and see if it was worth buying.
Where did the old man get hit at?
Where did you hit?
Yeah. At his house or Red River Shores?
In the shores. Yeah, but it was
Who hit him?
Jay.
Jake hit him? You didn't hit him?
I wouldn't hit that old ass man. Jake started smacking him up like, you're gonna do this and that and that and this, and I was like, "Man, no, don't, you know, what do you?" I pushed Jake, you know, so I said, "Jake, don't, no, dude, don't hit him, he's old." And then I was like, "Whatever, dude, I'm not in it," and I just walked off.
So you walk off. Did Jake tie his hands with zip ties? Jake did? When did his hands get tied?
Right before he took him home. I don't know why.
So Jake tied his hands at Red River Shores, that's what you're telling me. And then hit him. And then took him home? Make no damn sense.
I mean, it's, yeah. Not really, kind of, not really, though. And, like, yeah.
Tommy is incoherent. He's stuttering. Truthful person just simply needs to recount an event where a liar needs to create it.
One question.
Yes.
Why didn't you call the police after it all happened? If you had nothing to do with it, why didn't you call the police?
I mean, I don't know.
You just got through saying you had nothing to do with
Yeah,
it, so why didn't you call the police?
I'm scared, man. I'm a drug addict, man. I can't help it. I need help, man.
That has got nothing to do with you picking up your phone, calling 911 anonymously and saying, here's what I just seen. Give me one good reason why you didn't do it, and I'll believe you. One reason. You just got there saying multiple times that you weren't going to be involved in hitting him because he's an old man. Because you have a conscience about that. You're not going to hurt an old man. But yet you see an old man get beaten. You see an old man get tied up. You see an old man get hurt, and you did nothing about it, nor did you call the police. Am I getting all of that about bundled up right? Yeah. You claimed you were going to tell the police about it, but that's not really what
I was trying.
That's not really what you were going to do, because you also admitted your words were you were going to use it to bribe him to lower the price of the drug. But that was your words. That's what you said.
Yeah.
That's what you said.
You had this video. This was your idea. You took it, and you did so with a purpose. It just showed that Tommy was the mastermind behind this whole thing.
My next step, I wanted to 100% identify him as the actual ringleader behind this. Sometime turning up the heat will let you know exactly where you are in the interview. I'm gonna tell you what I think. This is just mind working. I think it's all your idea. Why don't we see if we can make this truck payment go down just a little bit? I think you were the ringleader. You were the mastermind. You said that you videoed him with the intention to bribe him. You just admitted it. You let me talk now. You never walked off. It's been your plan to the beginning. It was your plan to get him to lower the price on that truck, and when he wouldn't lower the price on that truck, it went too far. Is that it?
Then you was gonna tie him up, scare the out of him, and get him lower price on that truck.
No.
Was the man afraid?
No.
The man was not afraid getting hit and
Tie him up.
and
Look, they always say he wasn't scared.
I'm sure he had fear. I'm scared to death right now. Something.
oh, you should be.
I started hitting him to get him to lower the price on the truck.
No.
What do you think he told us?
The old man was fine.
He's not fine. He's an ICU at St. Vincent, Little Rock. Hey, not mate. That's how serious this is, bud. You know what I can see? Maybe the video didn't work. Maybe the video didn't work. So I know, we'll amp it up a little bit. So I'll tie him up, put something over his head, make him think we're gonna hurt him. Maybe that get him to lower the price on that truck, right?
No, Jake just smacked him like out of nowhere.
You standing right there when he got tied up, yes or no?
Well, I was
Right
in the
there.
yard somewhere.
Right there with him.
I was somewhere in the yard.
He's right there with him, talking to you, having a conversation with him.
I know. I was somewhere in the
You're
yard.
having a conversation with him.
I understand that, dude.
I know. Don't you holler at me, brother.
Man, you keep
Don't you holler at me.
You keep cutting me off.
No, because you won't tell me the
You're asking me where the was
Exactly. Where were you?
when he
Where were you at? Quit dancing around. Where were you at?
walked up over to him. You know what I'm saying? They're sitting. The old man's sitting in the car. I walked up right there.
So after hours of speaking with Tommy Trosper, he still was lying. He would talk to us enough to verify his involvement. However, he wouldn't give us the details of his involvement.
If he said nothing else, we present him to the jury as a liar, and that is amazing advantages for the prosecution.
How many lies you told me?
I'm not lying to you. Seriously, I can't. I'm not. I know the.
You know what? What you know?
I don't know, man. I feel.
The most important things that we were able to get from an interview with Tommy was Tommy's admission that him and Jake Miller at one point in time were in the presence of Edward Vaughn. Had taken Edward Vaughn to someplace out in the county, which is identified as Chris Torres's house, that him and Jake Miller were present when Edward Vaughn was bound against his will, that they were present when Edward Vaughn was assaulted. So basically it was a confession, but just in piecemeal.
Trosper, you got anything else to say, man? Huh? No?
Tell you,
Right now, you're under arrest for kidnapping, battery 2. Your bond's been set $250,000. So I need you to go ahead and stand up. We'll walk you to the back and get all the papers processed.
I'm against this wheel.
Come on, bud.
We had Tommy in jail, and now the next step is absolutely find Jake.
Chris Torres told law enforcement that on April the 9th of 2017 that Tommy Trosper, whom he knew, and Jake Miller, whom he knew, came to his residence in Judsonia with Edward Vaughn, and that Tommy Trosper showed Chris Torres a video that he had.
At one point, Tommy asked Chris, did he want to help in quote-unquote roughing Edward Vaughn up? And Chris Torres told him no.
According to Chris, that was when he saw Edward Vaughn actually bound with zip ties.
Chris said he becomes upset and he's ordered him, you got to get out of here, get off my place. I'm not involved with this. And they leave. Another thing that Chris was willing to tell us was that Jake's hiding out in an abandoned trailer, just a few trailers down from where he was living. So we left immediately from Chris Torres's house and drove down the road looking for the address. We surrounded that house and ultimately found Jake Miller and took him into custody.
Based off evidence alone, we suspected that Jake Miller was just along for the ride of the co-conspirator. We believed that this was all Tommy's doings, that Tommy was the main puppet master behind this. Tommy Trosper was the one that wanted the vehicle. Tommy Trosper was the one that knew Chris Torres, and that's where they took Edward Vaughn. Tommy Trosper was the one that recorded the secret video.
We had Tommy's story. We had Tommy blaming Jake for a lot of stuff. So now we're going to try to see how truthful Jake might be and how different a story he was going to tell from what Tommy told.
Initial by each one of your yeses. Not saying you're going to talk to me, it's just saying I read them to you, you understood them, inside right there.
Talk to you about
Edward Vaughn. What you know about it, bro?
we didn't do it.
You didn't do it?
No.
No, I got witness statements. I got Tommy Trosper locked up saying he did. Brother, I mean it, man. Sometimes it's just best to be honest.
He already knows why he's there, and he's automatically going to a denial. That strategy is just to make him feel like he's standing alone, like everybody else has blamed you. We know exactly what happened, so we're past you telling the lies and trying to protect your friends because they blamed it all on you.
You're gonna have to remember a little bit.
Oh, man. Tell us what happened. Tell us the whole truth. What are you scared of?
You're just worried about the consequences. Worried about your freedom, weren't you?
Yes. And look, I try so hard to do good.
Well, we're in a pretty bad spot, but we can get through it, Jay. But the best way to get through it is to be honest about it. That's the best cards you can play right now. That's just me being honest with you. You want to start over and tell us what happened, bud?
Started off when we first went over didn't know what he was doing. Tommy told me just go with it. And he went and knocked on the door. The old man came out. And he showed him the video. And then that's when Tommy hit him. Oh God, he was like stunned. And then after that, we went to Chris's, and Chris told us to get the man out of there.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know you helped zip ties.
No, Tommy told me to blindfold him. Then I said, man, I'm sorry.
Right.
But I was told to do this.
Okay. So Tommy tied him, zip tied his hands, you blindfolded him, then what?
We went right and he was trying to find somewhere to put him.
Okay. Did Tommy talk about killing him?
He said he should.
He should kill him. Okay. Then what?
We rode, and at the end of it, it was morning time. Tommy dropped me and the old man off, and that's when I cut off the zip ties and was going back to the old guy's place.
So y'all go back, you take him back home, you cut the zip ties off of him, then y'all take him home.
And then Tommy left, and the older guy, I guess he went into someone's house, and I guess they asked about his face. And he told them.
How'd you leave?
My cousin came and got me.
Getting Jake to actually admit these little key pieces was absolutely critical in this investigation. Primarily because Jake began to confirm exactly what Edward Vaughn said earlier.
Tommy hit him. They said, be aggressive.
Ollie wanted everybody to rough him up, didn't you?
How many times you hit him?
Just, I slapped him once.
You slapped him once?
Yes. I mean, I know that really, really looks bad on me, but I can't lie. I mean, I just wasn't thinking.
Chris ever hit you?
Not that I see.
So what are you sorry for exactly?
I'm sorry for even being there.
Well, friends and drugs.
Not thinking.
I felt like he opened up and told us more of the truth. I think Jake Miller was scared. I think he was worried about the outcomes and the situation he had found himself in, where Tommy, I don't think, cared about any of that.
It's the two individuals pieced stories together that we was able to find a basic consistency that supported the allegation by Edward Vaughn.
But it was hopeful that Mr. Vaughn would pull through and be strong enough to testify in court against the two and actually be able to be the victim that stands up there and points at them and says, these are the men that attacked me and did this to me. We received a call from the hospital Mr. Vaughn was at that he had actually passed away from his injuries. And that changed everything for us.
It's always the cases like this that involve children or the elderly that can't defend themselves that you take most to heart as an investigator, you know. So, you know.
He was a very sweet man. It broke my heart that something of this tragic could happen to a person so kind.
The charges were amended from kidnapping and battery to actual capital murder and kidnapping.
Without having any type of forensic evidence, and now we have a victim that's not going to be there to testify in court It was all on us. We were going to have to tell Mr. Vaughn's story and seek justice for him.
I felt it was extremely important to interview Tommy Trosper again to see if he had any remorse for what they did, and seeing if Tommy Trosper would admit it, and if he would admit it, if he would tell the truth.
All right, well, we're going to update you on it. What's your highest level of education?
So now we was wanting to see how far he would be willing to go speaking with us when we tell him that his charges are upgraded to the most heinous charge of a criminal act you can be charged with in this state.
What we want to let you know is that we've received a phone call today from St. Vincent's Infirmary indicating that Mr. Vaughn has died. Your charges will be upgraded to capital murder. Is there anything that you would like to say on your behalf?
What is he going to do? Is he going to actually admit this? Is he going to tell the truth to save himself? Or is he going to continue on with his lies and deflection?
I can imagine hearing that kind of news, especially if I knew that this man's death was because of something I did. But this gives you the opportunity to actually go into a little bit of detail, and perhaps other people that will be watching this video can hear how sorry you are for what you did. Are you sorry? Now is really the time for truth. Now is not the time for lying. Okay? Your story hasn't changed. You say that you had absolutely no involvement in hitting him. Correct?
I didn't hit him.
Okay. So if anyone else comes forward and testifies that they've seen you hit him, they're lying.
I mean, yeah.
They aren't. Well, if they are, they aren't.
Yeah.
Does it surprise you that Jake's not telling the same story you're telling? Why would Jake not tell the same story you're telling? Jake's saying you both hit him, that he shares the same involvement as you did. Y'all both hit him. That's what Jake said. You're saying you didn't. And here's the problem I have with this. You were wanting to buy the vehicle, you made the video, yet you had nothing to do with assaulting him or binding him or nothing like that. What was Jake's purpose for doing this?
I don't know what was going through Jake's head.
Could it be because you're not telling the truth because you're afraid? Let's call a spade a spade.
I did not foresee Tommy Trosper being any more sympathetic to the plight of Edward Vaughn than what he was the first time around, even with being leveled with the accusation of a capital murder upgrade, but I was wanting to see.
Well, yeah, it does look pretty bad.
What do you mean?
You were driving. The man's laying in the back seat. You didn't hit him with a fist. You didn't hit him open-handed and slap him.
I don't recall him at all. I'm seriously telling the truth.
Do you realize the gravity of the situation that you're in?
I understand.
Okay, because it don't make sense. That's why you sitting here and saying that you didn't do it. 12 jurors is going to have a difficulty in believing that because I just laid out the factors that they would have a problem with.
I understand.
No, you don't understand
I
because
do.
you know what you did. And why you will not admit to the truth is something that you're going to have to deal with on your own. I kind of sort of figure we could get it out now because here's what you need to understand. Mr. Vaughn was in a critical care unit in St. Vincent's for several days. He is now at the state crime lab with a medical autopsy being conducted. They're going to know exactly what happened. And when you stand before the court, ready? I didn't do it. That don't fare well. But what will fare well is that you tell the truth about what you did and explain your involvement. That's the only time we're going to get you to be able to do that.
I'm trying to. He was talking to
He
me.
is a 91-year-old man that was beat up, zip-tied, and held against his will. And you're now saying that the only person that did all of this with a scrawny little kid named Jake Miller? Are you seriously wanting us to believe that? That you had no involvement whatsoever, but yet you conceal your crime? You hide it. Mr. Vaughn didn't die immediately. Do you not understand that he was able to tell us who did what and what happened? Do you understand that? Are you sure there's nothing more you need to say? I'm putting this out here for your benefit. He didn't die immediately. He told us what happened. The reason why we didn't bring it to you when you were arrested is because we was wanting to see what you said. He is now dead. That changes the entire ballpark. Understand, he didn't die immediately. Once again, is there anything else you want to say from what you previously said according to your involvement? Knowing that we spoke with him. Tommy, now's the time. Mr. Vaughn said that in that vehicle you knocked the horse out of him. Period. You hit him. You hit him. Putting it out. That's what Mr. Vaughn says. Are you telling me that he is lying? You hit him in the face. He didn't die that day. He died just yesterday. We know what happened. We're giving you this opportunity to explain yourself.
That's what I did him though.
Okay, Tommy.
And look, I mean, yeah, I had involvement in it. Yeah.
I know you had involvement.
Because, I was the reason we picked him up.
I know.
Even with presented with the possibility of being charged with murder, he maintained his specific denial.
I tried to tell you my story, man.
Now here's what you need to do, because Jake Miller just did it. It's your call. I'll just give you one last time to answer that question, then I won't bother you anymore.
I promise you I didn't hit him.
At this point in time, we cannot give you any other opportunity to explain yourself. Edward Vaughn is dead because of what Tommy Trosper and Jake Miller did to him. That's unequivocal. That is unprecedented truth. The only person whose story is different is you. Only person. Story is different. Is you. And are you sure that's what you want to go to court with? Being the only person who looks like a liar. Is that what you want to do?
I don't know what the hell happened, really.
I have already established he is a liar. So now the strategy was I wanted to show the jury exactly the type of person you're going to be seeing.
Okay. One more question, and then I'll just go on and leave this alone. It's not a question, it's a statement. It's a statement I want to hear from you. I want you to reach deep down in your soul. If I'm Mr. Vaughn and I'm sitting right here, or I'm Mr. Vaughn's family and I'm sitting right here, what would you say to them? Let them hear your soul. What would you say to them? Loss of words? Okay. Okay. All right, Tommy. Well, we thank you for speaking with us. Your charges have been officially upgraded to kidnapping and capital murder. There is no bond set for you at this point. All right.
Even though we weren't able to get a full confession from Tommy Trosper, he put himself there, he put himself as a participant, and he gave us the motive, which I believe was the only motive.
I felt we were extremely successful in the interview because Tommy Trosper did confirm the basics, but he also confirmed that he had absolutely no sympathy or any remorse for what he did.
Out of all the cases I've worked, I've never went to a victim's funeral. I just felt honored to be at that funeral.
So it's a very unique thing about the Veterans Cemetery in Arkansas because whenever you go onto those grounds, it demands silence. It demands reverence. And I couldn't think of a better place for Edward Vaughn to rest.
Tommy Trosper pled guilty to murder in the first degree and kidnapping and was sentenced to 40 years in the Arkansas Department of Corrections. Later, Jake Miller pled guilty to murder in the first degree and kidnapping and was sentenced to 20 years in the Arkansas Department of Corrections. I'm happy with the investigation. I'm satisfied that we were able to get that conviction that we needed for this case and do what we could to get justice for Edward Vaughn.
Mr. Vaughn was pretty amazing, and it's great to be able to call a World War II veteran a friend.
It began with a door that wouldn't open. On a quiet California morning in late spring, the kind of morning where the air smells faintly of citrus and ocean salt, a neighbor knocked on the faded blue door of a small house tucked into a modest suburban street. The knock echoed softly, swallowed by the stillness. No answer. The neighbor knocked again, harder this time. Inside, nothing moved. No footsteps. No television. No sound at all. But something felt wrong. Later, investigators would say that sometimes the smallest moments become the doorway into the darkest stories. A door that won't open. A silence that feels too heavy. A feeling that something inside a house has gone terribly, violently wrong. By the end of that day, police tape would stretch across the yard like a warning to the world. And the name of the woman who lived inside would become the center of a mystery that would haunt California for years. Her name was Linda Carver. 34 years old. A quiet woman. Divorced. No children. Known by neighbors as polite but private. The kind of person who waved politely while bringing groceries inside, who kept her lawn trimmed, who never caused trouble. Nothing about Linda Carver suggested the word that investigators would soon whisper in the hallway outside her bedroom. Murder. The discovery came just after 10 a.m. Police officers pushed open the front door after the neighbor reported that Linda hadn't been seen for 2 days. The door wasn't locked. That was the first detail that set off alarms. Linda was known for locking everything, doors, windows, even the small gate beside the driveway. Inside the house, the air was still. The living room looked ordinary at first glance. A couch. A coffee table. A half-empty mug sitting beside a stack of unopened mail. The television remote lying on the floor. But then came the smell. A faint metallic odor that police officers recognize immediately. It drifted through the hallway like a warning. They followed it to the bedroom. And that's where the case truly began. Linda Carver lay on the floor beside her bed. The scene was quiet, but the violence was unmistakable. Investigators would later confirm she had been stabbed multiple times. The attack had been sudden, brutal, and personal. There were no signs of forced entry. No broken windows. No shattered locks. Nothing missing from the house. Which meant one terrifying possibility. Whoever killed Linda Carver may have walked in through the front door like a guest. Or worse. Like someone she trusted. The news hit the neighborhood by afternoon. Police cruisers lined the street. Yellow tape stretched across Linda's lawn. Reporters gathered on the sidewalk, cameras pointed toward the small house where detectives moved slowly through each room. Neighbors stood in clusters, whispering. Linda? Murdered? No, that can't be right. She was so quiet. The street had always been calm. Families. Dog walkers. Retirees watering their lawns. The kind of neighborhood where people borrowed sugar from each other. Now every front door was locked. Every window checked twice. Because if something like this could happen here, it could happen anywhere. Detectives began their work the way they always do. Step by step. Room by room. Clue by clue. The first surprise came quickly. Linda's purse sat neatly on the kitchen counter. Her wallet was inside. Credit cards untouched. Cash still folded inside the leather pocket. Robbery was unlikely. The second surprise was stranger. Linda's car was parked in the driveway. Her keys were lying on the small wooden table near the entrance, which meant she hadn't been planning to leave. She had been home. Safe. Until someone came through that door. Investigators studied the crime scene carefully. Blood patterns. Footprints. The position of furniture. There were signs of a struggle in the bedroom. A lamp knocked over. Bedsheets twisted. But the fight had ended quickly. Too quickly. Linda had likely known her attacker. There were no defensive wounds suggesting she tried to run. Instead, the attack appeared sudden, almost like she had been caught off guard. A chilling thought began to form among detectives. Maybe Linda had opened the door willingly. Maybe she had even invited the killer inside. Outside the house, reporters started asking questions. Who was Linda Carver? What enemies did she have? What secrets might she have been hiding? Friends described her as quiet but friendly. She worked at a small accounting office 30 minutes away. She had been there for nearly 6 years. Reliable. Punctual. Invisible. Her co-workers were stunned. Linda, one colleague said during a brief television interview. She was the last person I'd expect something like this to happen to. But detectives knew something the public didn't. Ordinary lives sometimes hide extraordinary secrets. And as they dug deeper into Linda's world, the first strange detail emerged. Linda had received a phone call the night before she died. A long one. Nearly 40 minutes. But when investigators checked the number, they found something unsettling. The call came from a prepaid cell phone. A burner. Untraceable. That discovery changed the tone of the investigation overnight. Because burner phones are rarely used for casual conversations. They're used for secrecy. For planning. For hiding. And suddenly the quiet life of Linda Carver didn't look quite so simple anymore. Detectives tracked Linda's final hours. She had left work around 5:30 p.m. Stopped at a grocery store. Bought a few items, milk, bread, pasta. Routine things. Nothing unusual. Security cameras showed her smiling politely at the cashier. Calm. Unbothered. She drove home shortly after. That was the last confirmed sighting of Linda Carver alive. The phone call came at 7:12 p.m. It lasted until nearly 8 o'clock. And sometime after that, something happened inside that small house. Something violent. Something fast. Something that left Linda Carver lying on her bedroom floor. But the strangest part of the crime scene wasn't the violence. It was what investigators didn't find. No fingerprints. None that didn't belong there. No weapon. The knife used in the attack was missing. And perhaps most unsettling of all, no sign that the killer had rushed. The house wasn't ransacked. Nothing overturned beyond the bedroom struggle. It looked almost deliberate. Controlled. As if the killer had known exactly what they were doing. By the second day of the investigation, detectives had assembled their first list of potential suspects. An ex-husband. A co-worker who had once argued with Linda in the office parking lot. A man neighbors occasionally saw visiting the house late at night. But every lead came with the same frustrating problem. No evidence. Interviews stretched for hours. Background checks dug through years of history. Still nothing solid. Meanwhile, the media began calling it what investigators feared it might become. A cold case in the making. California woman found murdered in quiet suburb. Mysterious phone call before death. Police searching for unknown visitor. The headlines spread quickly. And with them came speculation. Was it a jealous ex? A secret relationship? A random intruder? Or something darker hiding beneath the surface of Linda Carver's quiet life? Then, 3 days after the murder, detectives found something that sent a ripple of excitement through the investigation. A neighbor had security cameras. Old ones. Grainy. Mounted above a garage across the street. The footage was far from perfect. But it showed something. At 7:08 p.m., just minutes before Linda's mysterious phone call began, a car pulled up outside her house. A dark sedan. The camera angle couldn't capture the license plate. But investigators could see the silhouette of someone stepping out. Tall. Male. Walking toward Linda's front door. The footage ended there. No clear face. No identifying details. Just a shadow approaching the house. And another disturbing detail. The car didn't leave immediately. It remained parked on the street for nearly an hour. Almost exactly the same length as Linda's final phone call. Then, just before 8:10 p.m., the sedan slowly drove away. Linda Carver was never seen alive again. For detectives, the video was both a breakthrough and a nightmare. It confirmed someone had visited Linda that night. But it also revealed how carefully the killer had covered their tracks. No license plate. No clear face. Just a ghost on camera. A visitor who arrived, stayed, and disappeared into the darkness of a California evening. And as the investigation pushed forward, another chilling possibility began to surface. What if the mysterious caller and the mysterious visitor were the same person? If that was true, then the last conversation Linda Carver ever had might have been with the person who would soon take her life. A thought that sent a cold wave through the detectives working the case. Because somewhere out there, a man had walked up to Linda's front door, talked with her, spent nearly an hour near her home, and then vanished into the night, leaving behind a murder scene. And a mystery that would refuse to die. The image from the security camera replayed again and again inside the police station. A grainy black and white frame. A quiet suburban street. A dark sedan idling beneath a streetlight that flickered every few seconds. And one figure stepping out. Detectives leaned closer to the screen as the tape rolled. The man moved calmly. No hesitation. No sign of rushing. He shut the car door slowly, glanced once down the street, and walked toward Linda Carver's front yard with the confidence of someone who either knew exactly where he was going or had been there before. Then he disappeared out of frame. Every investigator in the room understood what that meant. Somewhere beyond the camera's narrow field of vision was Linda's front door. And behind that door was a woman who had no idea that within the next hour, her life would end violently. The tape ended with the sedan pulling away at 8:09 p.m. No headlights flashing nervously. No tires spinning in panic. The car simply rolled forward and vanished into the quiet darkness of the neighborhood. That calm departure unsettled detectives more than anything else. Killers who act in panic often leave chaos behind them. But this looked controlled. Planned. Calculated. The first task was obvious: identify the car. Investigators enhanced the footage as much as technology in 2001 allowed. Frame by frame they studied the vehicle's shape, the curve of the roof, the outline of the rear lights. The best guess from analysts was frustratingly vague. A mid to late 1990s sedan. Possibly a Toyota. Maybe a Honda. Dark color. Black or dark blue. In California, the description matched thousands of vehicles. Still, detectives started knocking on doors. Neighbors were questioned again. Did you see this car? Did you notice anything strange Tuesday night? Most people remembered nothing. But one elderly resident at the end of the street offered a detail that made investigators pause. She had seen the car. Not clearly, but clearly enough to remember one thing. It drove slow, she told detectives quietly. Like the driver was looking for a house. That detail landed heavily in the investigation. Looking for a house. Not arriving confidently. Which raised a chilling possibility. Maybe the visitor wasn't someone Linda knew well. Maybe he had to search for her address. Detectives returned to Linda's phone records. The burner phone call from the night of her death remained the most suspicious lead. 48 minutes of conversation. Nearly an hour of words exchanged between Linda and someone who had deliberately hidden their identity. Investigators contacted the cellular provider linked to the prepaid phone. The results were predictable. The phone had been purchased with cash. No registration. No name. Just a cheap plastic device sold at a convenience store in a neighboring county 2 weeks before the murder. The phone had been used only 3 times. 2 short calls. And then the long call with Linda Carver. After that night, it was never activated again. A disposable connection. Used once. Then erased. That level of caution began to suggest something disturbing. This wasn't random. Whoever had contacted Linda had gone to great lengths to avoid leaving a trail. Detectives started digging into Linda's life more aggressively. Friends. Co-workers. Family members. Every relationship was examined. And that's when the first uncomfortable truth surfaced. Linda Carver had secrets. At work, she was known as dependable. Friendly but quiet. The kind of employee who finished tasks early and rarely complained. But a few co-workers mentioned something that had gone mostly unnoticed at the time. During the last month of her life, Linda had been distracted. She took several personal calls in the hallway outside the office. Once, a colleague overheard her arguing softly. Not shouting. But tense. Pressed. When asked about it later, Linda brushed it off. Just personal stuff. Nothing more. But the timing bothered investigators. Those arguments happened roughly 2 weeks before the murder. The same time period when the burner phone had been purchased. Coincidence? Maybe. But detectives had learned long ago that coincidences often hide the truth. Then another detail emerged. Linda had recently withdrawn a large amount of cash. Nearly $3,000. The withdrawal happened 4 days before her death. That discovery raised immediate questions. Why would someone like Linda suddenly take out that much money? Her bank record showed no pattern of large spending. No debts. No unusual purchases. The money had simply disappeared. There was no sign of it inside the house. Not in drawers. Not in her purse. Not anywhere. It had either been spent or given to someone. And suddenly detectives wondered if the mysterious visitor had come to collect it. Extortion. Blackmail. A secret payment. The theories started piling up. Meanwhile, the investigation took another turn when detectives interviewed Linda's ex-husband. His name was Mark Carver. The divorce had happened 3 years earlier. According to court documents, the separation had been relatively quiet. No violent disputes. No custody battles since they had no children. Mark now lived 2 hours away in Northern California. When detectives arrived at his apartment, he appeared shocked. Linda's dead. His reaction seemed genuine. He cooperated fully, answering every question calmly. Where were you Tuesday night? At home, he said. Alone. That answer immediately placed him on the suspect list. But there was a problem. Mark had an alibi. Sort of. Phone records showed he had made several calls that evening from his home landline. One call lasted nearly 30 minutes with a coworker discussing a project deadline. That call happened right in the middle of the estimated murder window. For now, Mark Carver drifted toward the background of the investigation. But detectives didn't forget about him. Ex-spouses have a way of reappearing in homicide cases. Another name also began surfacing repeatedly. A man neighbors had seen visiting Linda's house occasionally during the past few months. He wasn't there often. But enough people had noticed him. Tall. Dark hair. Driving a sedan. The same general description as the man from the security footage. Detectives tracked down the name through one neighbor who had briefly spoken with him while collecting mail. His name, she believed, was Eric. Just Eric. No last name. No clear explanation for why he visited Linda. But she remembered something strange. He never stayed long, the neighbor said. Maybe 20 minutes. Sometimes less. And he always arrived late. After sunset. Those visits suddenly took on new significance. If Eric was the same man captured on the camera, then Linda may have known exactly who came to her door that night. But finding Eric proved far harder than expected. Linda's phone records showed no contact under that name. Her address book contained no Eric. Co-workers didn't recognize the description. Family members had never heard of him. It was as if the man existed only in brief glimpses. A shadow pulling up in a car. A figure walking toward her house. Then disappearing again. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. The investigation slowly widened. Police canvassed nearby counties for similar vehicles. Thousands of dark sedans were checked. Nothing. The burner phone store was re-examined. Surveillance footage from the purchase date had already been erased. Too much time had passed. The trail had gone cold. And then something unexpected happened. 6 months after Linda Carver's murder, a detective reviewing old evidence noticed a detail that everyone else had missed. It was hidden in the security footage. Not the car. Not the man. Something else. In one frame, just one, the sedan's interior briefly caught the glow of the streetlight as the driver opened the door. Inside the car, on the passenger seat, there was something small. Square. Reflective. Investigators enlarged the image carefully. It wasn't perfectly clear. But the object looked unmistakably like a photograph. A single photograph lying face up on the passenger seat. A photograph the visitor had apparently brought with him. The significance of that detail slowly settled across the investigation team. Why bring a photograph to a meeting with Linda Carver? Was it meant to show her something? Prove something? Threaten something? Or remind her of something she had tried desperately to forget? Suddenly the murder began to look less like a random act, and more like the final chapter of a story that had started long before that quiet California evening. A story someone had worked very hard to keep hidden. Because somewhere out there, a man had driven to Linda's house with a burner phone in his pocket. A photograph beside him. And a reason strong enough to walk through her front door. And never let her walk out alive. By the time winter arrived in California that year, the murder of Linda Carver had already begun to settle into a troubling category investigators feared the most. An unsolved homicide with too many questions and too few answers. The yellow police tape had long since disappeared from the small suburban house. The reporters had moved on to newer headlines. Neighbors slowly returned to their routines, watering lawns, walking dogs, waving politely across driveways. But something about the street had changed. People locked their doors earlier. Porch lights stayed on longer. and every so often, someone would glance toward Linda's empty house and feel a quiet chill. Inside the police department, however, the case refused to fade. Detectives kept returning to the same 3 pieces of evidence, over and over, like a puzzle that refused to come together. The burner phone, the mysterious visitor, and the photograph inside the car. Each detail suggested planning. Each detail suggested purpose. And yet the motive remained invisible. Detectives decided to focus on something that had been overlooked in the chaos of the early investigation, Linda's past. Not just the last few weeks of her life. Her entire life. Investigators began building a timeline stretching back years. Childhood. College. Marriage. Divorce. Every address she had ever lived at. Every job she had ever held. Every person who had ever crossed her path. It was tedious work. But sometimes the key to a murder hides in the quiet corners of someone's history. Linda Carver had grown up in Southern California. A middle-class upbringing. Stable parents. No criminal record. No wild teenage years that stood out. She attended a small community college before transferring to a state university where she studied accounting. Friends from those years described her the same way everyone else did. Quiet. Responsible. A little private. She married Mark Carver when she was 27. Their relationship had seemed normal from the outside. 2 working adults. No dramatic fights. No police calls. But the divorce records hinted at tension that had never fully surfaced. Mark had filed the paperwork. The reason listed was simple, irreconcilable differences. Nothing more. Still, detectives noticed something odd. The divorce settlement had been unusually fast. Almost rushed. As if both parties wanted it over quickly. Investigators interviewed Mark again. This time the questions were more direct. Why did the marriage end so suddenly? Mark hesitated before answering. It just stopped working, he said. What does that mean? He rubbed his forehead, clearly uncomfortable. Linda started acting distant. Secretive. Like something was bothering her but she wouldn't say what. When did that start? Maybe a year before the divorce. The timeline immediately caught investigators' attention. A year before the divorce. 3 years before the murder. Something had happened in Linda's life during that period. Something big enough to fracture a marriage. But apparently not big enough to appear in any official record. Detectives pushed further. Did Linda ever mention another man? Mark shook his head slowly. No. But he paused. But what? There were phone calls. What kind of calls? She'd leave the room to take them. Late at night sometimes. Did you ever hear who it was? No. She'd always say it was work. But Mark didn't sound convinced. And neither were the detectives. The idea that Linda had been hiding something long before her death began to reshape the investigation. If the conflict that led to her divorce had anything to do with the person who later killed her, then the roots of this crime stretched back years. Not weeks. Not months. Years. Investigators shifted their attention to Linda's workplace again. But this time they focused on her earlier years there. Co-workers were asked to remember things they may have dismissed at the time. Arguments. Visitors. Anything unusual. Most interviews produced nothing. Until one co-worker hesitated. Her name was Karen Mitchell, and she had shared an office cubicle row with Linda for nearly 4 years. At first, Karen insisted she didn't know anything useful. But as detectives prepared to leave, she spoke again. There was one thing, she said quietly. What thing? Karen leaned forward slightly. About a year before Linda got divorced, a man came to the office looking for her. Detectives froze. What kind of man? I don't know his name, Karen said. But he didn't look like a friend. What do you mean? He seemed angry. Karen described the moment clearly. The man had walked into the office lobby asking for Linda by name. Tall. Dark hair. Wearing a leather jacket. When Linda came out to see him, the conversation immediately became tense. They didn't yell. But their voices were sharp. Urgent. Karen remembered one phrase clearly. The man had said it loud enough to carry through the lobby. You can't just pretend it didn't happen. Linda's response had been quiet. But whatever she said seemed to make the man even angrier. After a few minutes, Linda asked him to leave. He did. But before walking out, he said something that had stayed in Karen's memory for years. This isn't over. Detectives exchanged looks. The description of the man sounded disturbingly familiar. Tall. Dark hair. The same general build as the visitor captured on the security camera. Karen hadn't thought much about it at the time. But after Linda's murder, the memory had started to bother her. Did you ever see him again? Detectives asked. Karen nodded slowly. Once. Months later. Where? In the parking lot outside the office. What was he doing? Talking to Linda in her car. Did they look angry? Karen shook her head. No. That time they looked serious. How serious? Like they were discussing something important. Detectives asked the question that had suddenly become critical. Did he drive a dark sedan? Karen thought for a moment. I think so. That answer sent a ripple of electricity through the investigation team. If Karen's memory was accurate, then the man who argued with Linda years earlier might be the same man who visited her house the night she died. And possibly the same man who called her using a burner phone. Which meant investigators finally had something they desperately needed. A pattern. Someone who had been part of Linda's life long before the murder. Someone who had confronted her. Argued with her. And possibly threatened her. But the problem remained painfully obvious. No name. No license plate. No solid identity. Just a shadow moving through fragments of memory. Detectives began searching office security logs from those earlier years. But time had erased most of the footage. Digital records had been overwritten. Visitor sign-in sheets had been discarded long ago. It was as if the man had slipped through Linda's life without leaving a trace. And yet one more disturbing detail soon emerged. Linda had never reported the confrontation at work. She never filed a complaint. Never told human resources. Never mentioned it to police. Which meant she had chosen to keep the conflict quiet. The question was why? Fear? Guilt? Or something even more complicated? Then another discovery surfaced that deepened the mystery. Investigators reviewing Linda's old email archives found a series of messages that had been deleted but partially recovered from backup servers. Most were mundane work communications. But one message stood out. It was short. Just one sentence. And it had been sent nearly 3 years before the murder. The sender's address was anonymous. A free email service. The message read, "You can't bury the past forever." No signature. No context. Just a digital whisper from someone who clearly believed Linda was hiding something. Investigators stared at the screen. The same theme kept appearing. Confrontations. Warnings. Arguments. And now threats. Something had happened in Linda Carver's life years before her death. Something serious enough that someone refused to let it go. The photograph found in the car suddenly took on a darker meaning. Maybe it wasn't just a picture. Maybe it was evidence. Proof of something Linda desperately wanted forgotten. which meant the man who walked up to her door that night may have come not just to talk, but to confront her with the past. A past that neither of them could escape. And somewhere in that past, hidden in the shadows of Linda Carver's quiet life, was the reason she ended up bleeding on the floor of her bedroom. A reason someone had been waiting years to settle. By the second year after Linda Carver's death, the case had taken on a strange reputation inside the department. It was the kind of investigation detectives hated most. Not because there were no clues, but because there were too many clues that almost meant something. A mysterious visitor, a burner phone, an angry confrontation years earlier, an anonymous email warning about a buried past. Every piece of the puzzle suggested a deeper story. But every time investigators reached for it, the truth slipped away. Still, one detail continued to haunt the case file. The photograph. The object investigators believed they had seen resting on the passenger seat of the visitor's sedan in that grainy security footage. At first it had seemed insignificant. But the more detectives studied the timeline, the more that small square shape began to feel important. People don't usually bring photographs to casual conversations. They bring them when they want to prove something, or accuse someone, or remind them of something they've tried to forget. Detectives began asking a simple question. What photograph could possibly be powerful enough to provoke a murder? The search turned back toward Linda's past once again. Boxes of her belongings had been collected from the house after the crime. They were stored in the evidence room, ordinary pieces of a life that had suddenly ended. Photo albums, old letters, college e-books, receipts. Investigators began examining everything carefully. Hour after hour, page after page. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Linda's photographs told the story of a quiet life. Family holidays, graduation pictures, beach trips with friends, snapshots from the early years of her marriage. But as detectives moved deeper into the collection, something odd emerged. There was a gap. A strange, noticeable gap in the timeline of Linda's photographs. Nearly 2 years were missing. No pictures. No prints. No film envelopes. Nothing. The gap fell roughly between the final year of her marriage and the months leading up to her divorce. Exactly the period Mark Carver had described when Linda began acting distant and secretive. Investigators stared at the empty space in the albums. People don't usually stop taking photographs for 2 full years. Unless something happened during that time. Something they didn't want preserved. The discovery pushed detectives toward a new strategy. If Linda had deliberately removed photographs from her life, maybe someone else had kept copies. Investigators tracked down friends from that period. Old classmates. Former co-workers. Neighbors from the apartment Linda and Mark had lived in during their marriage. Most people remembered nothing unusual. But one former neighbor recalled something that made detectives pause. The neighbor, a retired teacher named Daniel Ross, remembered seeing a man visiting Linda during the last year of her marriage. Not often, but enough to stand out. Ross described the man carefully. Tall. Dark hair. Usually arriving late in the evening. The description was painfully familiar. Detectives asked the obvious question. Did Mark Carver ever see him? Ross shook his head. I don't think so. The visits always happened when Mark wasn't home. A heavy silence filled the interview room. If the neighbor's memory was accurate, Linda may have been meeting someone in secret during the final year of her marriage. Someone who matched the description of the mysterious man seen later on the security camera. Someone who might have been Eric. Or whatever his real name was. Detectives pressed further. Did you ever see their conversations? Once, Ross said slowly. What were they doing? They were arguing. That word again. Arguing. Ross remembered watching from his window one night when their voices carried across the apartment courtyard. He couldn't hear every word. But one phrase had stuck with him. The man had said it loudly enough that Ross remembered it years later. "You promised this would stay between us." The sentence hung in the air like a shadow. Between us. A shared secret. Detectives asked Ross if he remembered anything else. For a moment, the older man looked uncertain. Then he nodded slowly. "There was something strange," he said. "What?" The man had a camera. Detectives leaned forward instantly. "A camera?" Ross nodded again. "A professional-looking one. Not a small point-and-shoot. One of those big ones with a strap." The significance hit investigators immediately. A camera. Photographs. And a mysterious image possibly sitting on the passenger seat of the killer's car years later. The pieces were beginning to shift. Maybe the photograph seen in the car wasn't random at all. Maybe it had been taken by the man himself. Which raised a disturbing possibility. What if the photograph contained something Linda desperately didn't want anyone else to see? Blackmail. The word appeared quietly in the detectives' minds. If someone possessed damaging photographs of Linda, they might have used them to control her, threaten her, extort money from her. Suddenly the missing $3,000 from Linda's bank account took on a darker meaning. It might not have been a coincidence. It might have been payment. Investigators returned to the timeline again. Linda withdrew the money 4 days before her death. The burner phone was used to call her shortly before the mysterious visitor arrived. The car parked outside for nearly an hour. Almost the exact length of the phone call. What if the visitor had come to collect something? Money? Evidence? Or both? And what if something during that meeting went wrong? The theory seemed plausible. But detectives needed proof. They began searching camera stores across the region, looking for records of professional equipment purchases. The hope was that someone matching the description of the mysterious man might have bought cameras locally. It was a long shot. Thousands of cameras were sold every year. But sometimes investigations move forward one improbable step at a time. Weeks passed. Then one afternoon a detective named Raymond Ortega received a call from a small photography shop in a neighboring county. The store owner believed he might have information connected to the case. When Ortega arrived, the man pulled out an old repair logbook. Inside was an entry dated for years before Linda's murder. A customer had brought in a damaged 35mm camera for repair. The name listed beside the repair order was simple. Eric Lawson. Detectives felt a pulse of excitement. Eric. The same name a neighbor believed belonged to the mysterious visitor. The repair log also included a phone number. But when investigators dialed it, they heard the message they had begun to dread. The number was no longer in service. Another dead end. Or so it seemed. But the repair form contained one more detail. An address. An apartment complex located 40 miles from Linda Carver's house. Detectives drove there immediately. The building manager checked old rental records. Yes. Someone named Eric Lawson had lived there years earlier. But he moved out 3 years before the murder. No forwarding address. No employment information. Nothing. Just another shadow slipping away. But before detectives left, the manager mentioned something else. A detail that had seemed meaningless at the time. Eric Lawson had received a lot of packages while he lived there. Large envelopes. Photo mailers. Developed film. Which meant one thing. Eric Lawson was likely a photographer. And somewhere out there. A photographer with a dark sedan. And a history with Linda Carver. Had disappeared just before she was stabbed to death in her bedroom. The discovery electrified the investigation. For the first time, detectives had more than just a vague description. They had a name. Eric Lawson. But names can be dangerous things in unsolved murders. Because sometimes they lead to the truth. And sometimes they lead straight into another mystery. And as investigators would soon learn, Eric Lawson was not the man he claimed to be. The name Eric Lawson sat at the top of the whiteboard in the homicide unit. For the first time since Linda Carver's murder, investigators felt something close to momentum. Not certainty. Not proof. But direction. A name gives shape to a ghost. And for nearly 2 years, the man who visited Linda's house on the night she died had been nothing more than a shadow stepping out of a sedan. Now detectives had something to chase. Eric Lawson. But as soon as they began pulling records, the excitement inside the department started to fade into something colder. Because the name Eric Lawson didn't seem real. The first check was simple: driver's license records. No match. Not in California. Not under that name, not with an address connected to the apartment complex where the photography repair log had placed him. Detectives expanded the search. Voter registration. Tax filings. Employment records. Credit history. Nothing. It was as if Eric Lawson had lived in that apartment for years without leaving a single official trace behind. That was impossible. Or at least it should have been. People don't exist in modern society without paperwork. Even the most private individuals eventually appear somewhere in a database. But Eric Lawson didn't. Which left investigators staring at the same unsettling conclusion. The man had used a false name. A deliberate identity. And if he had created a fake identity once, he might have done it again. Detectives returned to the apartment complex where Lawson had lived. This time they spoke to residents who had been there during the same years. Most people barely remembered him. Quiet tenant. Kept to himself. Carried camera equipment in and out of the building. But one former neighbor remembered something specific. A woman named Tracy Bennett. She had lived across the hall from Lawson for nearly a year. He worked nights sometimes, she told investigators. Or at least he left at night. Left for work. I'm not sure it was work. What do you mean? Tracy shrugged slightly. He'd leave with the camera gear, but sometimes he'd come back hours later without it. Where did the gear go? No idea. Then she added something else that made detectives pause. He had visitors sometimes. What kind of visitors? Women. How many? Different ones. Every few weeks maybe. Did you recognize any of them? Tracy shook her head. But one of them stood out in her memory. Not because she knew the woman, but because she had seen her photograph in the news years later. Linda Carver. The room fell quiet. You're sure? Detectives asked. Tracy nodded slowly. Yeah. When I saw her on the news after the murder, I remember thinking I'd seen her before. How long before the murder? Years. Back when Eric still lived there. That confirmation hit investigators like a jolt of electricity. Linda hadn't just known the man calling himself Eric Lawson. She had visited him. Gone to his apartment. Which meant their relationship ran deeper than anyone had previously understood. Detectives pushed further. What were they like together? Tracy thought for a moment. They didn't act like a normal couple. What do you mean? They looked tense. Arguing. Sometimes. Other times they just talked quietly. But there was one thing that stuck with me. What? Linda always looked nervous when she left. That word lingered in the air. Nervous. Fear. Unease. The same tension co-workers had described years earlier. The same tension neighbors remembered from the apartment courtyard argument. Detectives left the building with more questions than answers. But the investigation had shifted again. Linda's connection to the mysterious photographer wasn't brief. It had lasted years. Which meant the events leading to her murder were probably far older than anyone realized. Back at the station, detectives expanded their search into photography circles across Southern California. Freelance photographers, event shooters, studio assistants, anyone who might have known a man matching Lawson's description. It took weeks. Hundreds of phone calls. Dozens of interviews. Then, finally, someone recognized the description. The tip came from a small independent photography lab. The owner had seen Lawson several times years earlier when he brought film in for development. The name Eric Lawson hadn't sounded familiar at first. But the description triggered a memory. Tall. Dark hair. Quiet. Always developing his own negatives. He didn't like us touching them, the lab owner said. That detail caught investigators' attention immediately. Professional photographers often develop their own film, but not always with such secrecy. Did you ever see the photos he was printing? Detectives asked. Only once. What were they? The owner hesitated. People. What kind of people? Women. A chill moved through the room. Portraits. Not exactly. The owner seemed uncomfortable. They looked like private photos. How private? The man exhaled slowly. Let's just say they weren't taken at weddings. The implication hung heavily between them. Detectives exchanged glances. If Eric Lawson had been photographing women in compromising situations, then the blackmail theory suddenly looked far more plausible. Investigators asked the most important question. Did you ever see Linda Carver in those photos? The lab owner thought carefully. Then nodded. Yes. The confirmation sent a wave through the investigation. What kind of photo? The man looked uneasy but answered anyway. She looked upset. How upset? Like she didn't want the picture taken. Silence filled the room. For the first time, detectives began to consider something darker than simple blackmail. What if the photographs weren't just embarrassing? What if they had been taken without consent? Hidden camera images. Secret surveillance. Or worse. Detectives pressed the lab owner for more information. But the man could only offer fragments of memory. He had only seen the negatives briefly. Lawson had quickly taken them back. Still, one detail remained clear. There were a lot of pictures, he said. How many? Dozens. Maybe more. Which meant one terrifying possibility. Eric Lawson might have been collecting photographs of women for years. And Linda Carver might have been just one of them. But if that was true, why kill her? Blackmailers rarely murder their victims. Dead victims can't keep paying. The motive still didn't quite fit. Unless something had changed. Unless Linda had threatened to expose him. Or destroy the photographs. Or reveal whatever secret connected them. Then another disturbing thought emerged. What if the photograph seen in the car the night of the murder wasn't of Linda? What if it was of someone else entirely? Someone connected to both of them. Someone who might explain why the confrontation that night turned violent. As investigators stared at the growing board of evidence, photos, timelines, witness statements, they began to realize something unsettling. The man known as Eric Lawson had lived carefully. Fake name. Disposable phone. Minimal records. A life designed to disappear when necessary. Which meant if he had killed Linda Carver, he had likely planned the escape long before the knife ever touched her skin. And somewhere out there, a photographer with a dark sedan and a collection of secret images had simply vanished, leaving behind one dead woman and a trail of shadows that stretched across years. But the most chilling discovery was still waiting. Because buried deep in the storage boxes of the police evidence room, there was something detectives hadn't examined closely enough. Something small. Something ordinary. Something that would soon reveal that Linda Carver's secret relationship with Eric Lawson was far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. A single undeveloped roll of film. Sealed inside an envelope. Hidden at the back of a drawer in her bedroom. A roll of film that no one had bothered to process yet. And when investigators finally decided to see what was inside, the case would change forever. The envelope had been sitting in the evidence locker for nearly 2 years. A small, ordinary thing. Brown paper. Creased corners. Linda Carver's name written faintly across the front in blue ink. Inside, sealed carefully in its plastic canister, was a roll of 35mm film that no one had thought important enough to develop. At the time of the murder, detectives had focused on the obvious clues: blood patterns, fingerprints, the missing weapon, the burner phone. A forgotten roll of film in the back of a bedroom drawer had seemed insignificant. But now the investigation had changed. Now there was a man connected to Linda's past who had lived under a false name. A photographer. A man who seemed to collect images of women in situations they might not want remembered. And suddenly that small plastic canister didn't look ordinary at all. Detective Raymond Ortega placed it carefully on the table in the evidence processing room. The label on the envelope had faded slightly with time, but it was still legible. One detail stood out immediately. The film had never been developed, which meant whatever images were inside had remained hidden since the day the roll was sealed. The room felt quiet as Ortega turned the canister slowly between his fingers. If Linda had taken these photos herself, they might show moments from her life investigators had never seen. But if someone else had taken them, the implications could be far darker. The film was sent to a professional lab used by the department for delicate evidence processing. Technicians handled it carefully, treating every frame as potential proof. Developing old film is slow work. Hours passed. Detectives waited. The first prints arrived late that evening. At first glance, the photographs seemed harmless. A park. A city street. A parking lot outside a shopping center. But the more investigators looked, the more they noticed something strange. The pictures didn't feel like personal snapshots. They felt like surveillance. Every image had the same quiet distance. Taken from far away. Often from inside a car or behind a building. And almost every photograph contained the same subject. Eric Lawson. Or at least the man investigators believed was using that name. Frame after frame showed the tall dark-haired man moving through everyday places. Walking into a grocery store. Standing outside a small office building. Loading camera equipment into the trunk of his sedan. Detectives leaned closer to the images. These weren't photographs he had taken. Someone had been photographing him. And that someone was almost certainly Linda Carver. The realization shifted the entire case. Linda wasn't just connected to Eric Lawson. She had been watching him. Following him. Documenting his movements. The next set of images deepened the mystery even further. In several photographs, Lawson wasn't alone. Different women appeared beside him. Sometimes talking. Sometimes entering buildings. Sometimes walking to his car. None of the women seemed aware they were being photographed. Investigators spread the prints across the table. The pattern was unmistakable. Linda had been tracking Lawson's interactions with other women. Why? Jealousy? Fear? Evidence gathering? Then came the photograph that made the room fall silent. It showed Eric Lawson standing beside a woman investigators immediately recognized. Karen Mitchell. Linda's co-worker. The same co-worker who had described Lawson confronting Linda at the office years earlier. The image was taken outside a small restaurant parking lot. Lawson and Karen stood close together, talking. Karen appeared tense, almost defensive. Detectives exchanged uneasy looks. Karen had told investigators she barely knew Lawson. But the photograph suggested something else. Something personal. Something that might explain why Linda had been secretly documenting his movements. The next series of photos made things even stranger. Some images were taken late at night. Parking lots. Apartment complexes. Dimly lit streets. Lawson appeared again and again in the frames, meeting women, talking quietly, sometimes handing them envelopes. Money? Photographs? No one could tell. But the behavior suggested a pattern. Lawson wasn't just photographing women. He was meeting them afterward. Repeatedly. Quietly. And Linda had been following him through it all. Which raised a terrifying question. Had she discovered what he was really doing? The final frames on the roll were the most disturbing of all. The location had changed. A beach parking area near the coast. Lawson stood beside his car. Across from him was Linda. The image was grainy and distant, but the tension between them was obvious. They were arguing. Even in the frozen stillness of the photograph, the confrontation felt intense. Lawson's posture was aggressive. Linda's body leaned back slightly, defensive. The photograph was dated, automatically printed by the camera, 6 days before Linda's murder. Which meant something serious had happened between them less than a week before she died. Detectives studied the next frame. The argument continued. Linda held something in her hand. A photograph. The same square shape investigators believed they had glimpsed in the sedan on the security footage. The last image on the roll showed Lawson reaching toward it, trying to grab it. And then the film ended. Just like that. No more frames. No explanation for what happened after the confrontation. But the meaning was unmistakable. Linda had discovered something about Eric Lawson. Something serious enough to start secretly documenting his life. Something that led to a face-to-face confrontation days before her murder. Detectives began reconstructing the timeline again. 6 days before her death, Linda argued with Lawson at the beach. For days before her death, she withdrew $3,000 from her bank account. The night she died, a burner phone called her for nearly an hour. Then Lawson, or the man investigators believed to be Lawson, arrived at her house. An hour later, Linda Carver was dead. The pieces were starting to align. But one question remained unanswered. What exactly had Linda discovered? The photographs showed Lawson meeting many women. But there was still no proof of a crime. No clear reason for murder. Until investigators noticed one final detail hidden in the developed negatives. In the background of several photographs, behind Lawson and the women he was meeting, something appeared again and again. A building. A small industrial structure with a faded sign partially visible above the door. The letters were barely readable. But technicians enhanced the images carefully. Slowly. Frame by frame. And eventually the words became clear. Silver Coast Studios. The name meant nothing to most people in the room. But when detectives searched the address listed for the building, the atmosphere inside the homicide unit changed instantly. Because Silver Coast Studios wasn't a photography business. At least not publicly. Officially, it was listed as a rental warehouse. But the address had appeared before in police records. Years earlier. Connected to a small investigation that had quietly disappeared. An investigation involving hidden cameras. Secret recordings. And allegations that several women had been secretly filmed without their knowledge. The case had collapsed due to lack of evidence. But now, suddenly, the name Silver Coast Studios was sitting in the background of Linda Carver's photographs. Which meant Linda may have uncovered something far more dangerous than blackmail. She may have stumbled onto a hidden operation. One that someone had worked very hard to keep secret. And if Eric Lawson had been involved in that operation, then Linda's murder might not have been the act of a desperate blackmailer. It might have been something colder. Something far more calculated. Because if she had proof of what was happening inside Silver Coast Studios, then the man who came to her house that night wasn't just trying to silence her. He was trying to protect something much bigger than himself. And somewhere beyond the quiet streets of that California suburb. The truth behind Linda Carver's death was beginning to reveal something far darker than anyone had imagined. The name Silver Coast Studios changed the temperature of the investigation overnight. Until that moment, the murder of Linda Carver had looked like a private war between two people, a quiet accountant and a shadowy photographer living under a false name. But the moment detectives reopened the old police file tied to that warehouse address, the case began to feel much larger. And much darker. The building itself sat on the outskirts of an industrial district nearly 40 miles from Linda's house. A grey concrete structure wedged between an auto parts distributor and a storage yard full of rusting shipping containers. Nothing about it looked remarkable. No studio lights. No photography signs. Just a faded metal door, a row of small windows near the roofline, and the weathered sign that read Silver Coast Studios. But according to old police notes, investigators had visited the building once before. 7 years earlier. Back then, the complaint had seemed minor. A woman claimed she had been secretly recorded during a modeling shoot. She said hidden cameras were placed inside dressing rooms, bathrooms, changing areas. The allegation was disturbing. But when police arrived, they found nothing. No equipment. No recordings. No proof. The building owner claimed the cameras were part of a security system. The model had signed a release form. The case quietly collapsed. And Silver Coast Studios went back to being just another anonymous warehouse on the edge of town. Until now. Detective Raymond Ortega stood across the street from the building one cold morning, studying it through binoculars. The photographs Linda had taken showed Eric Lawson meeting women here. Late at night. In parking lots. Quiet conversations. Exchanges of envelopes. And if Linda had been following him, documenting his movements, she must have believed something criminal was happening inside. The problem was that the building had changed ownership 3 times since that earlier investigation. The current owner was a shell company registered under a legal firm in Los Angeles. No employees. No listed business activity. Just a locked building and a lease that had been quietly renewed every year. Which meant if something illegal was happening inside, it was being hidden extremely well. Detectives requested a search warrant. But without stronger evidence, the request stalled. A building connected to an old, closed investigation wasn't enough to justify breaking down a door. So the investigation shifted to surveillance. If Eric Lawson had been meeting women there in the past, maybe he still was. Unmarked police cars began quietly watching the building. Night after night. The first week produced nothing. The parking lot stayed empty. The windows stayed dark. It looked abandoned. But on the 9th night, just after 11 p.m., a dark sedan rolled slowly into the lot. Detectives watching from across the street felt their pulse quicken. The car matched the same general shape seen in the old security footage outside Linda's house. Not identical, but close. The driver stepped out. Tall. Dark hair. Even from a distance, the silhouette felt familiar. Detectives stared through their scopes as the man unlocked the warehouse door and disappeared inside. The lights came on a moment later. Bright studio lights. And they stayed on for nearly 2 hours. When the man finally emerged again, he was carrying camera equipment. Exactly the kind Linda's former neighbor had described years earlier. The man loaded the gear into the trunk of the sedan and drove away. Detectives didn't follow. Not yet. Instead, they documented everything. License plate. Time of arrival. Time of departure. The plate traced back to a rental company. Another dead end. Just like the burner phone. Just like the fake name Eric Lawson. Whoever this man was, he had spent years perfecting the art of disappearing. But investigators finally had confirmation of something important. Silver Coast Studios wasn't abandoned. Someone was still using it. And if that someone was the same man connected to Linda Carver's death, then the place might hold the answers they had been chasing for years. The next step came quietly. Detectives pulled traffic camera footage from nearby intersections on the night the sedan left the warehouse. Piece by piece, they tracked its route across the city. From the industrial district to a quiet residential neighborhood 30 minutes away. The car turned onto a tree-lined street and disappeared into a small apartment complex. Detectives moved carefully. Too quickly, and the suspect might vanish again. But they couldn't risk losing him. 2 days later, officers knocked on the door of apartment 3B. A young man answered. Early 20s. Confused. Not the man they were looking for. But the sedan was parked outside his building. Detectives asked him about it. The explanation came quickly. The car wasn't his. He had borrowed it from a friend. What friend? Detectives asked. The young man hesitated. Just a guy I know. What's his name? He shrugged. Eric. The room went still. Eric what? I don't know his last name. That answer sounded painfully familiar. Detectives showed the young man a photograph reconstructed from witness descriptions of Eric Lawson. The young man nodded immediately. Yeah. That's him. Where does he live? I'm not sure. Where did you meet him? At the studio. What studio? The young man shifted uneasily. Silver Coast. The investigation had just taken another turn. Because the young man wasn't a photographer. He was a college student. And when detectives pressed him further, the story that emerged sent a chill through the room. He had answered an advertisement online. A photography job. Simple modeling work. Easy money. When he arrived at Silver Coast Studios, Eric Lawson explained the job involved photographing couples. Private photo sessions. Nothing illegal. Just private. The student didn't ask too many questions. He needed money. So he helped with lighting equipment and camera setups. But after a few sessions, he began noticing something strange. Some of the cameras were hidden. Tiny ones mounted in vents. Others inside shelves. Pointed toward dressing areas. Bathrooms. The student claimed he quit immediately when he realized what was happening. But Eric Lawson had remained calm. Almost amused. You're overreacting, he told him. Then he made a quiet promise. If you keep your mouth shut, you'll never hear from me again. The student kept that promise. Until detectives knocked on his door. And now the horrifying shape of the truth was finally emerging. Eric Lawson wasn't just a photographer. He was secretly recording people. Hidden cameras. Private rooms. And if Linda Carver had discovered what was happening, if she had photographs proving it, then the confrontation on that beach 6 days before her death suddenly made terrifying sense. She wasn't arguing about a relationship. She was confronting him with evidence. Evidence that could destroy him. Or worse. Expose an entire operation built on secrecy and exploitation. And when Eric Lawson walked up to Linda's front door that night, he may not have come to argue. He may have come to recover something. The photographs. The proof. The thing Linda Carver had risked her life to uncover. But somewhere between the conversation and the quiet California night outside her house, Something had gone terribly wrong. Because Linda never had the chance to show anyone what she knew. And the man who may have killed her was still out there. Still moving through the world under a name that wasn't his. Still disappearing into the shadows every time the investigation got too close. But detectives were closer now than they had ever been. Closer than Eric Lawson probably realized. Because the young man from apartment 3B had given investigators something priceless. A recent photograph. A selfie taken during one of those strange nights at Silver Coast Studios. In the background of that image, standing beside a rack of lighting equipment, was the clearest picture anyone had ever captured of the man known as Eric Lawson. And for the first time in years, the ghost had a face. The photograph changed everything. For nearly 3 years, the man known as Eric Lawson had existed only as fragments, witness descriptions, grainy surveillance silhouettes, half-remembered encounters. A tall figure. Dark hair. A quiet man stepping out of a sedan. A shadow slipping through Linda Carver's life and disappearing the moment the investigation got close. Now, for the first time, detectives were staring directly at his face. The image wasn't perfect. It had been taken casually by the college student inside Silver Coast Studios, a quick selfie with lighting equipment stacked behind him. But just over his shoulder, standing near a tripod rack, was the man investigators had been chasing. Clear enough. Sharp enough. Real. Eric Lawson, or whatever his real name was, stood in the background adjusting a camera lens. His expression was neutral, almost bored. Dark hair. Narrow jawline. Late 30s, maybe early 40s. He didn't know the photo existed. And that mistake might finally expose him. Detectives immediately ran the image through every facial recognition database available to them. Driver's license records. Criminal databases. Passport files. Hours passed. Then the first result appeared. A possible match. But not under the name Eric Lawson. The name attached to the facial recognition result was Daniel Mercer. The room went silent. Daniel Mercer. Age 41. Originally from Oregon. Former freelance photographer. But what really caught investigators' attention was the next line in the file. Mercer had once been questioned in connection with a case involving hidden cameras. The investigation had taken place 8 years earlier in Portland. A woman reported that a photographer she had hired for portfolio work had secretly recorded her while she changed clothes. Police had questioned Mercer. But once again, just like the Silver Coast case years later, they couldn't prove anything. No equipment. No recordings. No charges. Mercer vanished from Portland shortly after that investigation. And now, years later, he appeared to have resurfaced in California under a different name. Eric Lawson. Detectives stared at the screen. If the facial recognition match was correct, then Linda Carver hadn't been dealing with a small-time blackmailer. She had been confronting a man who had been walking dangerously close to criminal exposure for years. A man who seemed to leave just before the law could catch him. A man who changed identities like jackets. And now that man might be connected to a murder. The department moved fast. A warrant was issued for Daniel Mercer's arrest in connection with the homicide investigation. Police returned to the apartment complex where the college student had met him. Apartment 3B. But Mercer wasn't there. He had never lived there. The student had only borrowed the sedan occasionally, and Mercer had used the parking lot to meet him. Once again, Mercer had stayed just far enough away to vanish easily. Detectives searched rental records across the city. Hotels. Short-term apartments. Studio spaces. But Mercer's name appeared nowhere. Which meant one of two things. Either he had already fled, or he had changed names again. Meanwhile, surveillance continued at Silver Coast Studios. For several nights after Mercer's identity was discovered, the warehouse stayed dark. No lights. No vehicles. No movement. It was as if whoever used the building had suddenly sensed something was wrong. Then on the fifth night, just after midnight, headlights swept across the parking lot. A vehicle rolled slowly toward the warehouse door. But it wasn't the familiar dark sedan. This car was different. A white van. Detectives watched through binoculars as the driver stepped out. The distance made it difficult to see clearly, but the build looked familiar. Tall. Lean. Moving with the calm confidence investigators had seen before. The warehouse door opened. Lights flickered on. The van disappeared inside. Detectives exchanged tense glances. If Mercer was inside the building, this might be the best chance they had to catch him. But entering the warehouse without a warrant could jeopardize the entire case. So they waited. 40 minutes passed. Then an hour. The lights inside continued to burn bright. Through the narrow upper windows, detectives could see shadows moving. Equipment shifting. Objects being carried. And then something unexpected happened. The warehouse lights went dark. The large door slid open again. But instead of the white van driving out, smoke began pouring from inside the building. Thick, dark smoke. Within seconds, flames burst through the windows. Detectives rushed forward, radios crackling with emergency calls. The fire spread quickly. Old industrial buildings burned fast, and Silver Coast Studios was filled with photography equipment, wiring, and flammable materials. Fire trucks arrived within minutes. But by the time firefighters forced their way inside, the warehouse was already collapsing. The fire raged for nearly 2 hours. When it was finally extinguished, Silver Coast Studios was nothing more than a blackened shell. Detectives walked carefully through the smoldering ruins the next morning. Anything that might have been stored inside, photographs, cameras, hidden recordings, had likely been destroyed. But one question burned hotter than the ashes. Was Daniel Mercer inside the building when the fire started? Investigators searched the wreckage carefully. Every corner. Every collapsed beam. Every pile of charred equipment. But no body was found. Which meant Mercer had escaped. Again. The fire had accomplished exactly what someone like him would want. Evidence gone. Cameras melted. Hard drives destroyed. Records erased. Years of secrets turned to smoke in the middle of the night. But the fire had also revealed something investigators hadn't expected. Hidden beneath the floor of the studio space was a small basement room. Firefighters had discovered it when the floor partially collapsed. Inside the room, investigators found something astonishing. Dozens of empty storage cases. Video racks. Metal cabinets. All designed to hold recordings. Thousands of recordings. But the cases were empty. Someone had removed everything before the fire started. Which meant Mercer hadn't panicked when police began closing in. He had planned the cleanup. Carefully. Methodically. He had entered the building that night not just to escape, but to erase every trace of what had happened there. Every hidden camera. Every photograph. Every recording that might link him to the women he had secretly filmed. Including Linda Carver. But even in destruction, criminals sometimes leave mistakes behind. And investigators found one. Buried under a collapsed metal shelf was a small object the fire hadn't completely destroyed. A memory card. Half melted. Blackened by heat. But still intact enough that forensic technicians believed some of the data might survive. The card was rushed to the digital forensics lab. Recovering files from fire-damaged memory cards is slow, delicate work. Days passed. Then a technician called Detective Ortega into the lab. "We recovered something," she said. She turned the monitor toward him. The file on the screen was a video. Short. Grainy. Shot from a hidden camera angle inside a dressing room. A woman stood near a mirror adjusting her blouse. She had no idea she was being recorded. Ortega felt his stomach tighten, because he recognized her immediately. It was Linda Carver. Alive. Unaware. Standing inside Silver Coast Studios months before her murder. But the most disturbing part wasn't the hidden recording. It was the moment near the end of the video. Linda suddenly looked up. Directly at the mirror. Her expression changed. Confused. Then alarmed. Because she had just realized something. The mirror wasn't a mirror. It was a one-way observation glass. Someone had been watching her the entire time. And that moment, the instant Linda discovered the truth about Silver Coast Studios, might have been the moment that sealed her fate. Because if Daniel Mercer knew she had discovered his operation, then the confrontation on that beach 6 days before her death wasn't just an argument. It was the beginning of a countdown. A countdown that ended in a quiet California house. With a door that opened. A man stepping inside. And a murder that someone believed fire could erase forever. The video from the damaged memory card played over and over in the digital forensics lab. Each time detectives watched it, the moment felt heavier. Linda Carver standing alone in the dressing room. Adjusting her blouse in the mirror. Calm. Unaware. Then the pause. The subtle shift in her eyes. That instant when confusion gave way to realization. The mirror wasn't a mirror. Someone had been watching. The footage ended seconds later, but the implications were enormous. For the first time, investigators had direct proof that Linda had been inside Silver Coast Studios. And more importantly, proof that she had discovered the hidden surveillance system. Detective Raymond Ortega leaned back in his chair, staring at the frozen frame of Linda's face. "You see it," he said quietly to the technician beside him. The technician nodded. She knew. And if Linda knew, then Daniel Mercer would have known she knew. Which meant her murder no longer looked like a crime of panic. It looked like damage control. The video file held one more crucial detail. Metadata. Every digital file carries small pieces of hidden information, timestamps, device IDs, camera serial numbers. Sometimes criminals overlook those details. In this case, Mercer had almost erased everything when he burned down Silver Coast Studios. Almost. But not quite. The memory card still held a timestamp. The video had been recorded 9 months before Linda Carver's murder. 9 months. For nearly a year, Linda had known something was wrong at Silver Coast Studios. And during that year, she had quietly started documenting Mercer's movements. Photographs. Surveillance. Evidence gathering. Which meant Linda hadn't been a victim wandering into danger by accident. She had been building a case. But against who? Just Mercer? Or someone else connected to the studio? Investigators returned to the empty storage cases discovered in the burned warehouse basement. Dozens of racks designed to hold recordings. Thousands of potential videos. If Mercer had secretly filmed hundreds of people, those recordings had value. Power. Leverage. Blackmail material. Which raised a disturbing possibility. What if Mercer wasn't working alone? What if Silver Coast Studios had clients? People who paid for access to those recordings. People who might have just as much reason as Mercer to keep the operation secret. The theory turned the investigation in a dangerous direction. Because if Mercer had partners, Linda Carver might have uncovered something much bigger than a single predator with hidden cameras. She might have discovered a network. Meanwhile, the search for Daniel Mercer intensified. His face, pulled from the selfie taken inside Silver Coast Studios, was distributed to law enforcement agencies across California. Every patrol officer. Every highway checkpoint. Every airport. But Mercer had vanished. No confirmed sightings. No financial activity. No new identity popping up in databases. Just silence. It was as if he had stepped off the map. 3 weeks after the warehouse fire, detectives received their first new lead. It came from an unexpected place. A motel clerk nearly 200 miles away along the Northern California coast. The clerk had seen Mercer's face on the news. And he was almost certain the man had checked into his motel 2 nights earlier. Using cash. No identification. The description matched perfectly. Tall. Dark hair. Quiet. Barely spoke. The motel room had already been cleaned by the time police arrived. But forensic teams examined it carefully anyway. Most criminals underestimate how much they leave behind. In this case, Mercer had left something small, but extremely important. A receipt. Crumpled in the trash. The receipt was from a gas station 30 miles north of the motel. The timestamp placed Mercer there shortly before midnight the same night he checked in. Detectives pulled security footage from the gas station. And there he was. Daniel Mercer. Standing under the harsh fluorescent lights, pumping gas into a different vehicle than before. The dark sedan was gone. Now he was driving an older pickup truck. Another vehicle that could easily disappear into traffic. But Mercer had made one mistake. He paid for the gas with cash. But he bought something else with a card. A cheap prepaid phone. Another burner. Investigators contacted the phone provider immediately. If Mercer activated the phone, they might be able to track it. But burner phones are unpredictable. Sometimes they're used once. Sometimes not at all. Days passed. No activity. Then, just before dawn on a cold morning, the phone finally came alive. A single call. 30 seconds long. The location ping came from a small coastal town surrounded by forests and cliffs overlooking the Pacific Ocean. By the time police arrived, Mercer was gone again. But they discovered something he had left behind. A small rented cabin near the edge of town. The door had been left open. Inside, the cabin looked like someone had packed quickly. Clothes missing. Suitcases gone. But scattered across the wooden table were photographs. Not the hidden camera recordings. These were different. Printed photos. Pictures of women. Dozens of them. Some smiling. Some unaware. Some clearly taken without permission. Investigators studied the images carefully. And one detail chilled the room. Every woman in the photographs had something in common. They had all visited Silver Coast studios. Models. College students. Aspiring actresses. People who had answered advertisements for photography work. The pictures formed a pattern. Mercer had been collecting them. Studying them. Documenting them long before they ever stepped into his studio. Which meant Linda Carver had probably uncovered only a small part of his operation. But one photograph stood out among the others. It wasn't of a woman. It was of a man. A middle-aged man in a business suit exiting a luxury hotel. The photograph had been taken from across the street with a telephoto lens. The man looked unaware he was being watched. Detectives recognized him immediately. He wasn't a model. He wasn't a victim. He was someone far more powerful. A wealthy real estate developer with deep political connections in California. His name had appeared in newspapers for years. And now his photograph was sitting in a cabin once used by Daniel Mercer. The room grew quiet. Because if Mercer had been secretly recording women, and also photographing powerful men, then Silver Coast Studios might not have been just a hidden camera operation. It might have been something far more dangerous. A blackmail machine. And if Linda Carver had discovered that truth, If she had proof that Mercer was collecting recordings of powerful people in compromising situations, then her murder might not have been about silencing one woman. It might have been about protecting an entire web of secrets. Secrets worth killing for. Secrets worth burning a warehouse to erase. Secrets that might explain why Daniel Mercer had been able to vanish again and again. Because if the wrong people were exposed, the damage wouldn't stop with him. And somewhere along the fog-covered California coast, the man who may have killed Linda Carver was still running. Still carrying whatever remained of the recordings from Silver Coast Studios. Still holding the kind of evidence that could destroy lives. But the deeper detectives dug into Mercer's past, the more unsettling the truth became. Because Linda Carver might not have been the only person who discovered what he was doing. And she might not have been the only one who paid the price. The photograph of the businessman sat in the center of the evidence table. Detectives stared at it longer than any of the others. Because unlike the dozens of pictures showing women connected to Silver Coast Studios, this image was different. Intentional. Focused. Daniel Mercer had gone out of his way to photograph this man. From across the street. With a telephoto lens. The man in the photo was Robert Halstead, a powerful real estate developer whose projects stretched across California's coastline. Halstead was not the type of person who appeared in the orbit of small-time photographers. He built luxury resorts, funded political campaigns, hosted charity galas attended by governors and celebrities. Yet somehow his photograph had ended up among Daniel Mercer's collection. Which meant one of two things. Either Mercer had been spying on Halstead, or Halstead had been involved with Silver Coast Studios. The idea sent a ripple through the investigation team. Because if Halstead had been a client of Mercer's hidden recording operation, then Linda Carver might have uncovered something explosive. Something powerful people would do almost anything to keep secret. Detective Raymond Ortega leaned over the table, studying the photograph again. "Run him," he said quietly. Within hours, investigators began digging through Halstead's public records. At first glance, everything looked clean. Business filings, construction permits, charitable foundations. But buried deeper in the timeline, one detail caught their attention. 7 years earlier, around the same time Mercer had first been investigated in Portland, Halstead had briefly owned a small production company. A company that specialized in commercial photography and video production. The business had existed for less than a year before quietly dissolving. No explanation. No records of major projects. Just a short-lived company that disappeared almost as quickly as it appeared. The connection felt too close to ignore. Investigators began mapping the timeline. 7 years ago, Mercer questioned in Portland for hidden camera allegations. Around the same time, Halstead launches a photography company. 2 years later, Mercer appears in California under the name Eric Lawson. Shortly after, Silver Coast Studios begins operating quietly in an industrial warehouse. Then Linda Carver enters the picture. The pattern was beginning to look less like coincidence and more like a long-running operation. But suspicion alone wasn't enough. Detectives needed proof. They arranged an interview with Robert Halstead. The meeting took place inside his downtown office tower overlooking the harbor. Glass walls. Expensive artwork. The kind of place where every surface gleamed. Halstead greeted the detectives politely, though his smile tightened slightly when they mentioned Silver Coast Studios. "I've never heard of it," he said calmly. "What about Daniel Mercer?" Ortega asked. Halstead shook his head. "Doesn't ring a bell." The photograph was placed on the desk between them. The developer studied it carefully. His expression remained perfectly controlled. "I assume that's me," he said. "Yes," Ortega replied. "Why would someone photograph me?" "That's what we're trying to understand." Halstead leaned back in his chair. "I'm a public figure. People take pictures. But detectives noticed something subtle. Halstead had never asked who took the photograph. He seemed to already know. The interview ended without a confession or a breakthrough. Halstead denied any connection to Mercer. Denied any knowledge of Silver Coast Studios. Denied everything. Legally, investigators had nothing to challenge him with. But as Ortega stepped out of the glass tower and into the bright afternoon sun, the feeling in his gut had hardened into something close to certainty. Halstead was hiding something. The question was how much. And how far that secret extended. Meanwhile, forensic analysts continued examining the photographs recovered from Mercer's coastal cabin. One image in particular caught their attention. It showed a woman entering Silver Coast Studios late at night. But this woman wasn't an unknown model. She was a television reporter. A local investigative journalist named Megan Walsh. Her name immediately triggered a new search through police records. And that search revealed something shocking. 3 years earlier, Megan Walsh had filed a police complaint. She claimed someone had broken into her apartment. Nothing had been stolen. But several personal items had been moved. Drawers opened. Closets disturbed. It had looked like someone was searching for something. The case had gone nowhere. No suspects. No evidence. But investigators now wondered if the break-in had anything to do with Silver Coast Studios. Because if Megan Walsh had visited Mercer's studio, and Mercer had secretly recorded her, then she might have discovered the same hidden cameras Linda Carver eventually found. Which meant Mercer may have had more than one problem to solve. Detectives contacted Megan Walsh immediately. The reporter agreed to meet that evening. When shown the photograph of herself entering Silver Coast Studios, her reaction was immediate. Shock. Then anger. That was supposed to be a headshot session, she said. Did anything unusual happen while you were there? She hesitated. Actually, yes. Walsh explained that during the session she had noticed something strange about the dressing room mirror. It felt wrong. Like someone might be behind it. The same realization Linda Carver had experienced months later. Walsh had confronted Mercer about it at the time. He dismissed her concerns. But the experience had unsettled her enough that she left early. And then, weeks later, her apartment was broken into. Detectives leaned forward. Did you ever investigate Silver Coast Studios yourself? Walsh's expression darkened. I tried. What did you find? Nothing I could prove. She explained that she had suspected Mercer was secretly recording clients. But without evidence, the story couldn't run. Then something else happened. Walsh looked directly at Ortega. Linda Carver contacted me. The room went silent. When? Ortega asked. About 8 months before she died. The timeline matched perfectly with the video recovered from the burned warehouse. What did she say? She told me she had proof that something illegal was happening inside Silver Coast Studios. Proof? The word echoed through the room. What kind of proof? Ortega asked. Walsh shook her head. She didn't say. She wanted to meet in person. Did you meet her? No. Why not? Because she cancelled. When? 2 days before we were supposed to talk. Walsh's voice grew quieter. She sounded scared when she called. The detectives exchanged uneasy glances. Linda Carver had tried to expose Mercer months before her death. She had tried to bring in a journalist. But something had stopped her. Fear. Threats. Or worse. Walsh continued speaking. There's something else you should know. What? Linda said Mercer wasn't the real problem. The words hung in the air like a storm cloud. What did she mean? Ortega asked. Walsh exhaled slowly. She told me the studio recordings were being sold. Sold to who? She didn't say. But she told me something I'll never forget. The reporter leaned forward slightly. She said the people buying them were powerful enough to make the whole thing disappear. The room went still. Because suddenly Linda Carver's murder no longer looked like a desperate act by a cornered criminal. It looked like something colder. Something planned. Something designed to protect the secrets of people who had far more to lose than Daniel Mercer ever did. And if Mercer had been running, maybe he hadn't been running from the police. Maybe he had been running from the same people Linda Carver had tried to expose. People who might have realized the operation was collapsing. People who might have decided it was time to erase every loose end. Starting with the woman who had discovered the truth. And ending with the man who had recorded it all. The words Megan Walsh spoke that night lingered in the investigation like a low, distant thunder. The people buying the recordings were powerful enough to make the whole thing disappear. For years, detectives had treated Daniel Mercer as the center of the case, a manipulative photographer, a man who built a secret operation around hidden cameras and private recordings. But now the possibility emerged that Mercer had only been the middleman. The one holding the camera. Not the one holding the power. Detective Raymond Ortega returned to the evidence board inside the homicide unit and began rearranging the case from the beginning. Linda Carver discovers the hidden camera room at Silver Coast Studios. She secretly begins documenting Mercer's movements. She contacts investigative reporter Megan Walsh with proof. She withdraws $3,000 from her bank account. Then Mercer visits her house. And Linda Carver ends up dead. For years, the story had seemed straightforward. Now it felt incomplete. Because if the recordings were being sold, then Mercer wasn't just running a hidden camera operation. He was supplying someone. And if those clients included wealthy or influential people, then the stakes of Linda's discovery were far higher than anyone had realized. Investigators began examining Robert Halstead again. The real estate developer had denied any connection to Mercer. But something about the photograph recovered from Mercer's cabin still bothered Ortega. Why would Mercer photograph Halstead leaving a luxury hotel? That wasn't the behavior of someone working for him. It looked more like someone collecting leverage. Blackmail material. Which meant Mercer might have been playing two dangerous games at once. Secretly recording women inside Silver Coast Studios. Then secretly recording the people who bought access to those recordings. If Mercer had been blackmailing his own clients, then he had created a very dangerous list of enemies. Detectives began pulling hotel security footage from the night the photograph had been taken. The image Mercer captured showed Halstead stepping out of the Harbor Crest Hotel at 11:43 p.m. But when investigators reviewed the hotel cameras, they noticed something strange. Halstead wasn't alone. A woman had exited the hotel beside him. She kept her head down as they crossed the sidewalk together. The footage was grainy, but when analysts enhanced the image, the woman's face slowly came into focus. It wasn't a stranger. It was someone investigators already knew. Karen Mitchell. Linda Carver's co-worker. The same co-worker who had described Eric Lawson confronting Linda years earlier at the accounting office. The same co-worker who appeared in one of the surveillance photographs on Linda's undeveloped roll of film. The same co-worker who had insisted she barely knew him. Now she appeared in security footage leaving a hotel with Robert Halstead. The web was tightening. Detectives contacted Karen Mitchell the following morning. When she arrived at the station, she looked calm. But the moment the hotel still frame was placed in front of her, the color drained from her face. "You want to explain this?" Ortega asked. Karen stared at the image for a long time before speaking. "I didn't do anything illegal." That wasn't the question. She exhaled slowly. "I met him at the studio." Silver Coast. Karen nodded. "What were you doing there?" "Modeling work. Photography sessions." The same story every victim of Mercer had been told. But the hotel? Ortega pressed. Karen hesitated. Then the truth began to spill out. Robert Halstead had been one of Mercer's clients. A regular one. Halstead paid large amounts of money to access the private recordings Mercer made inside Silver Coast Studios. Recordings of women who believed they were simply participating in photography sessions. Karen had discovered the hidden cameras during one of those sessions. Just like Linda had. But instead of confronting Mercer, Karen had made a different choice. Mercer offered her a deal. Keep quiet. And he would introduce her to wealthy clients willing to pay for private meetings. Halstead was one of those clients. Karen's voice shook slightly as she spoke. I didn't know how deep it went. How deep did it go? Ortega asked. She looked down at the table. Deeper than you think. According to Karen, Mercer maintained a private library of recordings. Hundreds of them. Clients paid enormous sums to access the footage. But Mercer also kept something else. Copies. Insurance. Proof that powerful people were involved. If anyone ever tried to shut him down, he had leverage. That explained the photograph Mercer took of Halstead leaving the hotel. He had been documenting his own clients, building a second layer of protection. But Karen revealed something even more disturbing. Linda Carver had discovered everything. Not just the cameras. The entire network. She came to me, Karen said quietly. When? A week before she died. What did she say? She told me she was going to expose Mercer. Karen's voice trembled slightly. She had copies of some of the recordings. That detail hit the room like a thunderclap. Linda hadn't just discovered the hidden cameras. She had taken evidence. Real evidence. Evidence that could destroy Mercer. And possibly the powerful people buying his recordings. Detective Ortega leaned forward slowly. Where are those recordings now? Karen shook her head. I don't know. Did Mercer know she had them? Yes. How? Karen swallowed hard. Because I told him. The silence that followed felt heavy. Karen Mitchell had been the one who warned Mercer. She had told him Linda Carver possessed evidence that could destroy the entire operation. Which meant Mercer's visit to Linda's house that night may not have been spontaneous. He had gone there with a purpose. To get the recordings back. But something during that meeting had escalated. Something that ended with Linda bleeding on her bedroom floor. Yet one question remained. If Linda had copies of the recordings, where were they now? Because when investigators searched her house after the murder, they found nothing. No tapes. No memory cards. No hidden storage devices. The evidence Linda had risked her life to collect had vanished. Karen stared at the table as if reading the same thought forming in Ortega's mind. Mercer got them, she whispered. Maybe. But Ortega wasn't convinced. Because Mercer had burned down Silver Coast Studios. He had erased his entire operation. If he had recovered the recordings from Linda's house, why destroy everything else? Unless something had already gone wrong. Unless Mercer had realized someone else was coming for him. Someone powerful. Someone who couldn't allow those recordings to exist anywhere. Which meant Mercer might not have been the only person walking up to Linda Carver's house that night. And the man detectives had spent years chasing might not even be the one who delivered the fatal blow. Because the deeper the investigation went, the more it began to look like Linda Carver had uncovered something far bigger than a hidden camera operation. Something powerful enough to erase evidence, burn buildings, and possibly kill anyone who got too close to the truth. And somewhere out there, in the dark spaces between Mercer's vanished life and the secrets Linda tried to expose, The real story of that night in California was still waiting to be uncovered.